All this time, we've been told that Ukraine aid was about survival, about defending democracy. But the FBI director just exposed something that changes everything. Some of that money may have been used for something else entirely. Not weapons, not humanitarian relief, but backroom deals, luxury purchases, and even funding for elites far from the battlefield. If that's true, we're not just talking about fraud, we're talking about a massive betrayal. So, where did the money actually go? Let's find out. FBI director exposes the truth. For years, the US has sent billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine, but recent reports reveal that a significant portion of the money remains unaccounted for. In a letter to Congress dated February 24, 2025, FBI Director Kash Patel urged lawmakers to launch an official investigation into how these funds have been used. His biggest concern? There is little transparency and even less accountability. Patel warned that without strict oversight, aid money could be slipping into the wrong hands. Billions have been sent for weapons, humanitarian relief, and infrastructure, yet reports are surfacing that some of it may have been misused, mismanaged, or worse, stolen. Patel is not just asking for a routine audit, he is demanding a deep dive into every transaction, every contract, and every dollar sent overseas. His letter has already shaken up Washington. Some lawmakers agree that Americans deserve to know where their tax money is going, while others argue that investigating Ukraine aid could damage international alliances. But Patel is clear. This is not about politics, it is about the truth. And now, Congress is under pressure to act. FBI Director Kash Patel did not stop at just calling for an investigation. He backed up his concerns with hard evidence, pointing to a December 2024 Government Accountability Office (GAO) audit that exposed serious discrepancies in how US military aid to Ukraine was being tracked. According to the audit, billions of dollars in weapons, equipment, and resources lacked proper documentation, making it nearly impossible to confirm where they ended up. The GAO report highlighted vague paperwork, missing records, and a lack of oversight in Ukraine's military aid distribution. Some shipments were logged incorrectly, while others had no clear documentation at all. Patel warned that if this issue is not addressed, the US could be blindly sending billions into a system that does not properly track its use. His statements have fueled concerns in Congress, where lawmakers are now scrambling to figure out how such massive funding has been so loosely monitored. Patel's push for a deeper investigation is gaining traction, with officials now facing increasing pressure to ensure that future aid is not lost in a black hole of corruption and poor record-keeping. Kash Patel did not just highlight Ukraine's aid tracking failures, he also pointed out that this is not the first time the US has been in this situation. He drew a direct comparison to a 2019 Pentagon report that revealed massive mismanagement of military aid in Afghanistan. That report exposed billions of dollars wasted, with missing weapons, inflated contracts, and equipment that never made it to the soldiers who needed it. Patel warned that Ukraine could be heading down the same dangerous path. Just like in Afghanistan, US aid is flowing into a war zone where corruption, poor oversight, and vague documentation are making it nearly impossible to track where the money and supplies actually go. In Afghanistan, the mismanagement was so severe that it crippled the country's military and left American taxpayers footing the bill for fraud and waste. Patel's warning hit a nerve in Washington. No one wants Ukraine to become another Afghanistan, but the parallels are hard to ignore. With billions at stake and no clear system of accountability, his call for an investigation is becoming harder for Congress to ignore. The concerns over Ukraine's aid spending took a major turn on March 1, 2025, when an FBI report exposed fraudulent contracts within Ukraine's defense procurement agency. The investigation revealed that weapons purchases had been heavily inflated over the past year, leading to massive overpayments for military equipment. According to the report, US aid money was used to purchase weapons and supplies at prices far above market value. Some contracts showed payments nearly double what the same equipment would cost elsewhere. In some cases, the money never even reached the actual suppliers. It was funneled through middlemen and offshore accounts, raising serious concerns about corruption. This discovery sparked an immediate backlash in Washington, where lawmakers began demanding stricter oversight before approving any more aid to Ukraine. Patel and other officials are now working to trace where the excess funds went, and early findings suggest that certain Ukrainian defense officials may have personally benefited from the inflated contracts. With these new revelations, the pressure is mounting for a full-scale audit. The question now is not just how much money has been wasted, but who has been profiting from it. Meanwhile, Kash Patel is not alone in his concerns over how Ukraine aid is being handled. On February 27, 2025, Senator J.D. Vance, ROH, and Representative Matt Gaetz, RFL, took a bold step by introducing an audit bill that demands full disclosure of how US aid has been spent before any new funding is approved. The bill comes in response to growing reports of fraud, inflated contracts and missing funds within Ukraine's defense and government sectors. Vance and Geitz argue that American taxpayers deserve to know where their money is going, especially when billions are at stake. They believe the Biden administration has failed to ensure accountability, allowing money to flow into a system with serious transparency issues. Their proposal has divided Congress. Some lawmakers insist that Ukraine needs continued support against Russia and that an audit could slow down critical aid. Others agree with Patel, Vance, and Geitz, saying no more money should be sent until every dollar is accounted for. With pressure mounting, this audit bill could change the future of U.S. foreign aid, setting a new precedent for accountability. Whether it passes or not, the fight for transparency is far from over. With suspicions of fraud and mismanagement surrounding Ukraine aid, the FBI has now teamed up with the Department of Defense, DoD, and the Office of Inspector General, OIG, to track exactly where the money has gone. Their mission? To trace every dollar sent to Ukraine between March 2022 and December 2024, with a special focus on unverified transactions that lack proper documentation. Early findings suggest a troubling pattern: payments made to third-party contractors with little oversight, vague invoices for military supplies that may never have arrived, and millions of dollars in unaccounted-for funds. Investigators are now looking into who signed off on these payments and whether they were knowingly covering up corruption. The sheer size of the aid packages makes this a massive undertaking. Between military aid, humanitarian relief, and reconstruction funds, the US has sent tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine. Patel and his team want to make sure none of it has ended up in the wrong hands. With so many unanswered questions, this investigation could expose one of the largest financial scandals in modern foreign aid history. If major fraud is uncovered, it will likely lead to criminal charges, policy changes, and a shift in how US aid is handled moving forward. As the FBI and other agencies dig deeper into Ukraine's aid spending, a February 2025 State Department review uncovered another alarming issue: missing humanitarian aid. Investigators found that millions of dollars intended for food, medical supplies, and refugee assistance had either disappeared or lacked proper documentation. The report highlighted poor record keeping, making it difficult to verify whether aid actually reached the people who needed it. Some shipments of essential supplies were marked as delivered, but investigators found no evidence of them in distribution centers. In other cases, contracts for aid delivery were signed with little oversight, raising concerns that fraudulent middlemen may have siphoned off funds. This revelation added another layer to the growing scandal. While much of the attention had been on military aid corruption, the fact that humanitarian relief was also being mishandled sent shockwaves through Washington. Lawmakers are now calling for a full-scale audit of every aid program tied to Ukraine, fearing that the extent of the fraud may be even larger than originally thought. With trust eroding and the push for accountability growing stronger, the pressure on Ukraine's government to prove where US aid has gone is reaching a breaking point. FBI Director Kash Patel has assured the public and lawmakers that legal action is on the way, revealing that 3 US contractors are already under investigation for allegedly inflating military supply invoices. These contractors, who were responsible for delivering weapons, ammunition, and other military equipment, in some cases, invoices listed prices nearly double the actual market value of the supplies. Patel's team is now following the money, trying to determine if these inflated costs were part of a larger corruption scheme or if Ukrainian officials were involved. This revelation only adds fuel to the fire. If American contractors have been exploiting aid money, who else is profiting from this war? With Congress already considering stricter oversight, these investigations could lead to major policy changes in how military aid is awarded and monitored. For Patel, this is just the beginning. He has warned that more names could come under scrutiny, and if fraud is confirmed, criminal charges will follow. The US is no longer just questioning where Ukraine's aid went, it is preparing to hold those responsible accountable. As part of a broader effort to prevent future aid mismanagement, Patel is leading an initiative to implement AI-based tracking for all foreign aid by 2026. This system aims to eliminate loopholes, detect fraud in real time, and ensure that every dollar sent overseas is accounted for. The proposed AI-driven tracking system would monitor every transaction, contract, and delivery linked to foreign aid, flagging suspicious activity immediately. Unlike current oversight methods, which rely on manual audits and paperwork that can be manipulated, this system would provide instant transparency, making it nearly impossible for money to disappear without a trace. The move has already gained strong support from lawmakers who have been pushing for better oversight. Supporters argue that if such a system had existed earlier, much of the fraud now under investigation could have been prevented. If successfully implemented, this AI-based tracking could revolutionize how the US handles foreign aid, ensuring that taxpayer money goes where it is meant to go, not into the pockets of corrupt officials and shady contractors. With the investigations into Ukraine aid fraud still unfolding, Congress is facing a major decision: whether to approve another round of funding funding for 2025 to 2026. While some lawmakers argue that continued support is essential for Ukraine's defense, others insist that stricter monitoring mechanisms must be in place before sending another dollar. In response to the FBI's findings of fraud, missing funds, and inflated contracts, several proposals are now on the table. Some lawmakers are pushing for real-time tracking of aid money, requiring Ukraine to provide detailed spending reports before receiving new funds. Others are calling for a special oversight committee to review all military and humanitarian aid before it is approved. The debate is deeply divided. Some warn that pausing or slowing aid could weaken Ukraine in its war against Russia, while others argue that without full transparency, US tax dollars will continue to be wasted. With pressure mounting and public opinion shifting, it is clear that any future aid package will come, aid with far more strings attached. As investigations continue and calls for accountability grow louder, one thing is certain: Ukraine will have to prove that every dollar is being spent where it is supposed to be. The push for accountability is revealing deeper issues that go beyond missing funds. Behind closed doors, shady deals and corruption have been siphoning aid money, raising questions about where the money is really going and who is benefiting the most. Secrets and backroom deals. In October 2024, a shocking discovery was made about Ukraine's military funding. Reports surfaced that millions of dollars meant for ammunition purchases had been funneled into offshore accounts instead of being used to buy weapons. Even more troubling, these accounts were allegedly linked to high-ranking Ukrainian defense officials. The money was supposed to strengthen Ukraine's military, ensuring they had the firepower needed to defend against Russian forces. But instead, it appears that some officials saw an opportunity to cash in on the war. Investigators traced transactions to banks in Cyprus and the Caribbean, raising serious questions about who authorized these payments and where the money actually ended up. This scandal only added to the growing concerns about how foreign aid is being handled. With billions flowing into Ukraine, many now fear that a significant portion is being siphoned off through corruption, leaving soldiers on the front lines without the support they desperately need. In September 2024, a major corruption scandal rocked Ukraine's government, leading to the resignation of Deputy Defense Minister Vyacheslav Shapovalov. A leaked audit revealed that the Defense Ministry had been purchasing food for the military at outrageously inflated prices, costing taxpayers millions. The audit exposed contracts where basic supplies, like eggs, bread, and canned goods, were priced 2 to 3 times higher than normal market rates. These overpriced contracts did not go unnoticed, and soon, journalists and investigators uncovered deep-rooted corruption in Ukraine's defense procurement system. Shapovalov, who was responsible for logistical support for the army, stepped down after intense public backlash. In his resignation letter, he claimed he wanted to protect the military's reputation, but many saw it as a desperate attempt to avoid further scrutiny. This scandal was yet another example of how corruption continues to drain resources meant for Ukraine's war effort. While soldiers fight on the front lines, some officials seem more focused on profiting from the war than actually winning it. In November 2024, yet another corruption scandal erupted in Ukraine, this time involving a road reconstruction project in Kharkiv. A government probe revealed that officials overseeing the project were demanding kickbacks from contractors, inflating costs, and delaying much-needed infrastructure repairs. The project was supposed to rebuild key roads damaged during the war, ensuring safe transport for civilians and military vehicles. Instead, investigators found that millions of dollars had been funneled into private accounts, with contractors being forced to pay bribes just to secure government contracts. Some companies refused to participate, while others played along, driving up costs for taxpayers. The findings sent shockwaves through Ukraine's government, further damaging public trust. At a time when every dollar should be strengthening the country, corrupt officials were pocketing money meant for rebuilding. Calls for accountability grew louder, with anti-corruption watchdogs demanding immediate action against those responsible. Ihor Kolomoisky, one of Ukraine's most notorious oligarchs, has long been a controversial figure, and new reports suggest he is still pulling strings behind the scenes. Despite already being under US sanctions, Kolomoisky allegedly manipulated energy sector contracts, securing lucrative deals for companies linked to his associates. Kolomoisky's influence in Ukraine's oil, gas, and electricity markets is no secret. Investigators found that key energy contracts were awarded to firms with direct ties to him, raising concerns about favoritism, inflated costs, and a lack of fair competition. This was especially alarming since Ukraine's energy sector is crucial to national security, particularly during the war with Russia. The US had sanctioned Kolomoisky in 2021 over corruption allegations, but his grip on Ukraine's economy appears to have remained strong. His continued involvement in high-stakes government contracts has fueled speculation that certain officials are still protecting him, despite international pressure. By February 19, 2025, the corruption scandals in Ukraine had reached a tipping point. In a highly critical Pentagon briefing, U.S. defense officials issued a stark warning. If Ukraine does not get its corruption under control, future Western military aid could be at risk. The statement sent shockwaves through NATO and Ukraine's allies, many of whom had already begun questioning how their financial and military support was being used. The briefing highlighted ongoing fraud in Ukraine's defense sector, pointing to mismanaged contracts, missing equipment, and inflated costs. With billions in military aid flowing into the country, the lack of transparency was starting to erode trust among Western nations. NATO allies privately expressed concern that continued financial and military support could become politically difficult if Ukraine's leadership failed to crack down on corruption. Some European nations even hinted that without major reforms, their level of assistance could decrease. In March 2024, an audit revealed yet another troubling case of mismanaged funds in Ukraine, this time in the healthcare sector. Investigators discovered that millions of dollars meant for hospital construction projects had been mysteriously diverted to administrative expenses, delaying much-needed medical facilities by more than a year. The funding was originally allocated to build and renovate hospitals in war-affected areas, providing better care for both civilians and wounded soldiers. Instead, a significant portion of the money never made it to the construction sites. The audit found inflated salaries, excessive consulting fees, and unexplained transactions, all labeled as administrative costs. This revelation sparked outrage, as Ukraine's healthcare system has been struggling under the weight of war, with hospitals lacking critical equipment and medical supplies. Delays in construction meant that thousands of patients were left without proper treatment, while corrupt officials lined their pockets. With Western nations closely watching how their aid is spent, this scandal only fueled concerns that Ukraine's government was failing to protect crucial public funds from abuse. The demand for accountability grew louder, but for those in need of medical care, the damage had already been done. But that's not all. In January 2025, leaked documents exposed yet another layer of corruption within Ukraine's defense sector. Investigators found that defense contractors had been inflating costs, billing the government for weapons, vehicles, and supplies at prices far above market value. The most shocking part, a portion of these inflated payments was quietly funneled into private accounts linked to Ukrainian government officials. The documents showed that contracts for basic military equipment, such as body armor and ammunition, had been marked up by as much as 300%. Instead of paying market prices, the Ukrainian government was signing off on bloated invoices, with the extra money disappearing into offshore accounts. This revelation deepened concerns about US and NATO military aid. If government officials were personally profiting from war contracts, then who was making sure that the money was actually being used to strengthen Ukraine's defense? The scandal ignited demands for stricter oversight, as international donors feared they were unknowingly funding corruption instead of Ukraine's war effort. With public trust eroding and the pressure to reform growing, Ukraine's leaders are faced with a difficult choice: clean up the system or risk losing crucial international support. By February 2025, concerns over Ukraine's handling of foreign aid were no longer just whispers, they were official. A European Commission audit found that Ukraine's financial records lacked basic transparency, making it impossible to track where massive amounts of funding had gone. This was not just a minor paperwork issue. The audit uncovered missing reports, vague expense categories, and incomplete financial statements, raising alarms among EU officials. As a result, the Commission delayed further funding to Ukraine, demanding a full review before approving any more aid. For Ukraine, this was a serious blow. With billions at stake, its government was now under immense pressure to clean up its financial system. Without real reforms, even its strongest European allies were beginning to lose patience. Ukraine's government had spent years promising to fight corruption, but a December 2024 Transparency International report told a different story. Despite repeated pledges for reform, Ukraine was still ranked as one of the most corrupt nations in Europe. The report highlighted widespread bribery, misuse of government funds, and lack of accountability in both the public and private sectors. Even after billions in Western aid poured into the country, corruption remained deeply rooted, especially in defense and infrastructure spending. This ranking was a wake-up call for Ukraine's leadership. With foreign donors demanding stricter oversight, the country risked losing vital financial and military support. If real reforms did not happen soon, Ukraine could find itself not just battling Russia, but also losing the trust of its most important allies. Time is running out for Ukraine. By mid-2025, the country could face a devastating financial crisis if major reforms are not put in place. Key donors, including the US, EU, and NATO allies, have made it clear, without strict oversight and accountability, future aid could be cut off. After multiple corruption scandals, missing funds, and inflated contracts, trust is wearing thin. Western nations have already begun delaying or reviewing aid packages, demanding clear spending reports and anti-corruption measures before approving more funds. For Ukraine, this is a serious problem. Without continued foreign aid, its economy could take a major hit, and military support could weaken at a critical time in the war. The message is clear: clean up corruption, or risk losing the financial lifeline that is keeping the country afloat. With every new revelation, trust in Ukraine's leadership is being tested. The exposure of fraud and corruption is now threatening not just financial support, but also Ukraine's security as allies begin to reconsider their aid commitments. The fallout. In March 2025, the United States officially suspended military aid to Ukraine, sending shockwaves through Kyiv. For years, US funding had played a critical role in supplying weapons, ammunition, and defense systems. Now, with that support suddenly cut off, Ukraine faced an uncertain future. On March 2, 2025, President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the nation, warning that without the immediate restoration of funding, Ukraine could be facing a major security crisis. With Russian forces still attacking, he stressed that losing US support could weaken Ukraine's defenses at a critical moment. The aid suspension has also strained relations between Washington and Kyiv. While some American lawmakers argue that Ukraine needs to prove it is handling aid responsibly, Zelensky insists that any delays in military support could cost lives on the battlefield. As tensions rise, the world watches closely, wondering what happens next in this high-stakes standoff. With the US suspending military aid to Ukraine, European allies have rushed to fill the gap. On February 28, 2025, the European Union announced an additional military aid package aiming to compensate for the loss of US support and keep Ukraine's defense efforts strong. The new aid package includes weapons, ammunition, and financial support for Ukraine's war effort. EU leaders stressed that Europe cannot afford to let Ukraine stand alone, especially with Russia ramping up its attacks. While European nations have already provided billions in military and humanitarian aid, this latest move signals that they are now taking on a greater leadership role in supporting Ukraine. However, some analysts worry that EU aid alone may not be enough to replace US support, especially in the long term. As debates over funding continue in Washington, Ukraine is now relying more than ever on its European allies to stay in the fight. The suspension of US military aid did not go unnoticed by Russia. Sensing an opportunity, Russian forces launched a wave of heavy missile strikes on Kyiv and Odessa between February 25th and March 1st, 2025, intensifying the war at a critical moment. The attacks were some of the most brutal in months, targeting military infrastructure, energy facilities, and civilian areas. Explosions rocked Kyiv's city center, while Odessa's ports and supply routes suffered major damage. Ukrainian defense officials confirmed that missile defense systems struggled to keep up, highlighting the urgent need for more Western military support. With fewer weapons and ammunition coming in from the US, Ukraine now faces a tougher fight on the front lines. Russian forces appear emboldened, testing how far they can push, while Ukraine scrambles for new military aid. For Kyiv, the message is clear: without continued Western support, the battlefield could become even more dangerous. As the war rages on, Ukraine's power grid has taken a devastating hit. In January and February 2025, Russian forces carried out targeted strikes on energy infrastructure, causing massive blackouts across multiple regions. Millions of civilians were left without electricity, heating, and running water as Ukraine's energy sector struggled to recover. These attacks were strategic and relentless, hitting power plants, transmission lines, and substations. In cities like Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Dnipro, residents faced rolling blackouts, forcing businesses, hospitals, and public services to rely on emergency generators. Some areas saw weeks of disruption, leaving families to endure the bitter winter with little to no heating. Ukraine has worked tirelessly to repair the damage, but with limited resources and ongoing attacks, restoring full power remains a constant battle. With Western aid in question, the country faces an uphill fight to keep the lights on, both for its people and its military efforts. By February 27, 2025, Ukraine's corruption scandals were no longer just a domestic issue. They had become a global concern. During a high-level meeting, G7 nations issued a warning, stating that continued military aid could be delayed unless Ukraine took serious steps to fight corruption in its defense sector. The warning came after multiple investigations uncovered fraudulent contracts, inflated prices, and missing funds linked to military aid. With billions in weapons and financial assistance at stake, Western allies are growing impatient. They want to see real reforms, stronger oversight, and accountability before committing more resources to Ukraine's war effort. For Ukraine, this was a serious red flag. Without G7 support, its military military capabilities could weaken, giving Russia a dangerous advantage. Now, Ukraine's leadership must act quickly, proving that aid is being used properly, or risk losing the critical support that has kept its war effort alive. The growing controversy over Ukraine aid mismanagement has ignited fierce debates in Washington. On March 3, 2025, House Speaker Mike Johnson led discussions on a proposal to implement real-time tracking on all future U.S. aid sent to Ukraine. The idea is simple. Every dollar, every weapon, and every shipment would be monitored in real time, ensuring aid is going where it is supposed to go. Supporters argue that this level of transparency is long overdue, especially after reports of fraudulent contracts and missing funds. However, some lawmakers fear that too much oversight could slow down critical aid, weakening Ukraine's ability to fight back against Russia. The debate is far from over, but one thing is clear: Ukraine will no longer receive blank checks without proof that the money is being spent responsibly. As the debate over Ukraine aid rages on, public opinion in the US is shifting. A February 2025 poll revealed that a growing number of Americans now oppose further unrestricted funding for Ukraine. What once had broad bipartisan support is now a highly divisive issue. Many Americans are frustrated by reports of corruption, questioning why billions of tax dollars are being sent overseas without proper oversight. Some argue that the US should focus on domestic issues, while others believe Ukraine still deserves support, but with strict conditions. The declining trust in foreign aid has put more pressure on lawmakers to demand greater transparency. Without clear accountability, the US government may struggle to justify additional funding, making Ukraine's future aid package far from guaranteed. With public trust in foreign aid declining and lawmakers demanding more oversight, the White House is now considering a major reform. By mid-2025, officials are discussing plans to launch a Foreign Aid Oversight Bureau, a new agency designed to track and regulate how US aid is spent abroad. The Bureau would introduce stricter accountability measures using real-time tracking systems, independent audits, and stricter reporting requirements. Supporters believe this would prevent fraud, eliminate waste, and ensure that every dollar is used properly. However, some critics worry that too much bureaucracy could slow down urgent aid, making it harder for countries like Ukraine to receive quick support. While the details are still being debated, one thing is clear: foreign aid will never be handled the same way again. Ukraine's hopes of joining the European Union just hit a major roadblock. On February 20, 2025, EU officials warned that Ukraine's failure to tackle corruption could delay its membership bid unless it implements serious reforms. For years, Ukraine has pushed for closer ties with Europe, seeing EU membership as a path to economic growth and stronger political stability. However, repeated scandals involving mismanaged aid, fraudulent contracts, and lack of financial transparency have made some European leaders hesitant to move forward. The EU has made it clear, if Ukraine wants to join, it must clean up its system. Without strict anti-corruption measures, Ukraine risks losing credibility among European nations and delaying its long-awaited membership for years to come. The pressure is on, and time is running out. The fallout from Ukraine's aid scandals is not just affecting Kyiv, it is forcing the US to rethink its entire foreign aid strategy. With growing concerns about financial mismanagement, Washington is now reassessing aid policies for other key allies, including Israel and Taiwan. For years, these nations have received billions in US military and economic assistance, but now, lawmakers are demanding stricter oversight. Officials are pushing for real-time tracking, tighter regulations, and transparency requirements to prevent the kind of fraud and waste uncovered in Ukraine. While Israel and Taiwan are seen as critical allies, US can no longer afford to send money without accountability. This shift signals a new era of foreign aid, where every dollar will be watched more closely than ever before. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.